64 civilians unlawfully detained, 77 summarily executed. These numbers presented in your reports paint a clear picture of violations and abuses perpetrated since the launch of Russia's full-scale, unprovoked and illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. They depict the disregard of Russia for its obligations under international law. And they only form the tip of the iceberg of human suffering, as OHCHR has recorded 25,170 civilian casualties since the 24th of February 2022. Behind these numbers, there are individuals who suffer. This we must never forget. Especially not here, this Council, which seeks to uphold the inherent dignity of every person. Human dignity that has been denied time and time again by Russia. As shown by your report, more than 91% of civilian detainees held by Russia have been subjected to torture. These alarming findings from your report reinforce the need to ensure accountability and ensure justice for all victims. We therefore welcome the reporting of the HRMMU and the Commission of Inquiry, the investigation by the ICC, the operationalization of the ICPA, the establishment of the Register of Damage and the work of the core group towards the Tribunal on the crime of aggression against Ukraine. We call for work to continue on the path towards full accountability. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Merci beaucoup. Je passe la parole à la distinguée représentante de l'Allemagne.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Germany aligns itself with the EU statement, and we would like to thank the High Commissioner for his update and the monitoring mission for their tireless work. Let me assure you that politically and financially, Germany remains a steadfast supporter of that mission. Some 500 days ago, Russia sent the world into turmoil. Its war of aggression against Ukraine is a war against a sovereign state and, let us not forget, a violation of the UN Charter of our most fundamental values and principles, causing a global food and energy crisis. And its effects are being felt around the world, but particularly by the most vulnerable. Therefore, the Black Sea Grain Initiative must be continued. Russia must not stop the Black Sea Grain Initiative, because the export of grain to the harbors of this world is a matter of life and death. We stand in solidarity with Ukraine and its people. The only way to stop the systematic human rights violations in Ukraine committed by Russia is for Russia to end its war of aggression now. There can be no impunity for atrocities committed in Ukraine. I thank you.
Merci. Et je passe la parole au distingué représentant de la Lituanie.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Lithuania aligns itself with the EU and the Nordic Baltic statements. We thank the High Commissioner for the oral update and the UN Human Rights Monitoring missions for its work on the ground. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine continues to bring destruction and suffering to civilians, including by recent deliberate targeting of the Novakakhovka Dam by the Russian forces, forcing thousands to flee. OHCHR's continuous work evaluating the situation and gathering evidence is very important. Therefore, it is crucial that the OHCHR and other human rights mechanisms have safe and unfettered access to Crimea and other territories of Ukraine temporarily occupied by the Russian Federation. We appreciate the OHCHR's recent report on arbitrary detention that reveals the scale of this unacceptable practice, as well as further human rights violations, including torture, ill treatment, and enforced disappearances. We also note with great concern the incidents documented by the Office of forcible transfers or deportations, including of Ukrainian children, and call for their immediate return. We stress once again that the accountability for all violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law, as well as for the crime of aggression, is key for bringing justice for victims in preventing further violations. Mr. High Commissioner, how could we mitigate the negative effects of human rights resulting from attacks on civilian infrastructure? Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de la République de Corée.
Representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Republic of Korea thanks the High Commissioner for his update. Amid Russia's illegal war against Ukraine, my delegation remains deeply concerned by the ongoing human rights violations and the lack of accountability. We are particularly troubled by the report's findings of arbitrary detention of civilians, deportation of conflict-related detainees, enforced disappearance, and the use of widespread torture and ill treatment. We urge Russia to put an end to attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure, to respect its obligations under international law, including international human rights and humanitarian law, and to release all those arbitrarily detained. Mr. Vice President, investigating all human rights violations is key to ensure accountability and justice for victims. In this context, we support the work of the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine and reiterate that all the independent monitoring mechanisms must be granted full and unfettered access to the entire territory of Ukraine. I thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant du Liechtenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We thank the High Commissioner for the presentation of the reports. Liechtenstein is deeply concerned about the deterioration of the human rights situation as a consequence of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. The high numbers of arbitrary arrests and detentions of civilians who are perceived by the Russian authorities to have an anti-Russian or pro-Ukrainian view are alarming throughout all Ukrainian territories temporarily controlled by Russia, some cases even amounting to enforced disappearances. In the detention facilities, many civilians have been subjected to torture and ill treatment, sometimes over the course of several months. Others were simply summarily executed. We urge the parties to the conflict to immediately cease the arbitrary detention of civilians, enforced disappearances, torture or ill treatment. Obligations under international human rights law and international humanitarian law must be upheld regardless of the prevailing circumstances. In conclusion, we reiterate our full solidarity with Ukraine and our support to the Human Rights Monitoring Mission. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Merci. Je passe la parole à la distinguée représentante du Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Portugal aligns with the EU statement and the statement by the Group of Friends of Accountability for the Aggression against Ukraine. We thank the High Commissioner for his oral presentation, and we welcome the Secretary-General's report on occupied Crimea. Portugal supports the work of the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, without which the OHCHR report would not be possible. The monitoring mission is proof that the Ukrainian authorities are serious in their efforts to protect, respect, and fulfill human rights, and to abide by their international obligations. Even at a time when Russia's unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression continues to cause untold damage. The OHCHR report focuses on detention of civilians and shows how Russia's armed forces have been acting in violation of international humanitarian law. Despite Russia's lack of cooperation with the monitoring mission, OHCHR has been able to document 864 cases of arbitrary detentions perpetrated by Russian forces between 24 February 2022 and 23 May 2023. More than 91% of civilian detainees described being subject to torture and ill treatment, and 26% of detentions resulted in forcible transfers or deportations. The Secretary-General's report also paints a bleak picture of the human rights situation in occupied Crimea. This blatant disregard towards international law cannot go unpunished. Portugal will continue to support all accountability efforts. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant du Royaume des Pays-Bas.
I now give the floor to the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Kingdom of the Netherlands remains deeply concerned by the large-scale human rights violations perpetrated by Russia and Ukraine. We appreciate the important work done by OHCHR to bring these issues to light. We are particularly disturbed by findings in the IG's report that Russian security forces carried out forcible transfers of civilians from the Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk and Luhansk regions to Crimea. We call on Russia to immediately halt the illegal transfer of persons, amongst whom children, and ensure that all are allowed to return home. We welcome the issuance of ICC arrest warrants as a first step on a path towards accountability for these crimes. Furthermore, Mr. Vice President, we are shocked by the findings of the HRMMU report, which documents the arbitrary detention of hundreds of people and the summary execution of 77 individuals by Russia. Impunity is not an option, Mr. Vice President. Thus, we are proud hosts of the ICPA, as well as the Register of Damage. These are further steps towards accountability. Here I must emphasize the importance to maintain sustainable political and financial support for these accountability tracks. Equally important is access to Ukraine to continue to shine a light on the situation. Therefore, my question to the High Commissioner, sir, in your view, what can be done by the international community to ensure your office has unimpeded access to temporarily occupied Crimea? Thank you very much.
Merci, et je passe la parole à la distinguée représentante de la République tchèque.
I now give the floor to the Czech Republic.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Czech Republic aligns with the EU statement. We thank the High Commissioner for his update and the monitoring mission for all the reports. Russia's brutal and unjustified war of aggression has caused enormous suffering of many, including millions of Ukrainian civilians. The report is documenting only some cases of widespread and systematic torture, rape, and forced deportations of civilians that are often held incommunicado in Russia or in territories illegally occupied by Russia, including Crimea. After the occupation of Crimea in 2014, Russia started politically motivated repressions against Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars. These persecutions have significantly intensified over the past year. Political prisoners who are seriously ill, with disabilities, and the elderly are the most vulnerable. They suffer not only from illegal deprivation of liberty, but also from the lack of adequate medical treatment. It is estimated that 24 political prisoners, including Irina Danilovic, Halina Dovhopola, or Servet Haziev, have serious illnesses posing a threat to their lives. Mr. High Commissioner, how could we effectively advocate to ensure proper treatment and medical care to the Crimean political prisoners at risk? I thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de l'Italie.
I now give the floor to Italy.
Monsieur le Vice-Président, Italy aligns itself with the EU statement and thanks the High Commissioner for his update. The latest report of the United Nations demonstrates once again that as a result of the full-scale, unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression by the Russian Federation, the human rights situation in Ukraine, including Crimea, has seriously deteriorated, causing enormous suffering to the Ukrainian people. Even children are not spared. Italy appreciates and supports the work of the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine that continues to play a crucial role to document and report the situation on the ground, drawing the attention of the international community to the need to ensure accountability for the grave violations of the international law, including summary executions, arbitrary detentions, and forced disappearance, torture, and ill treatment, which must be immediately halted. A lasting peace cannot be achieved without justice, international legality, the full respect of Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. Therefore, Italy will continue to support Ukraine as long as necessary and remains fully engaged to counter the negative impact of the war on the rest of the world, particularly on the most vulnerable people. I thank you.
Merci. La parole va au distingué représentant du Japon.
I now give the floor to Japan.
Mr. Vice President, Japan would like to thank High Commissioner for his oral update. We also appreciate the interim report of the Secretary General on the human rights situation in Crimea. We are deeply concerned over the humanitarian and human rights situation in Ukraine. In this regard, Japan fully supports the work of the HRMMU and the OHCHR to conduct monitoring, reporting, and advocacy on the human rights situation in the country, which is now more crucial than ever. Japan condemns in the strongest terms Russia's aggression against Ukraine, which constitutes a serious violation of international law, including Charter of the United Nations. We reiterated our call on Russia to fulfill its obligations under international humanitarian law, human rights law, and humanitarian law. Russia's aggressions against the sovereignty state of Ukraine is an outrage act that has shaken the very foundation of the international order. The sovereignty and the territorial integrity of any nation, large and small, must be respected. Japan strongly opposes unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force or coercion anywhere in the world. Japan will continue to stand with the Ukrainian and the people of Ukraine. I thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole à la distinguée représentante de la Slovénie.
I now give the floor to Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President and Mr. High Commissioner. Slovenia reaffirms unwavering support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity. Mr. High Commissioner, your report raises significant concerns, especially in regards to de facto security detentions by the Russian Federation in the occupied territories of Ukraine. If international humanitarian law safeguards are not in place, it can constitute arbitrary detention. We further fear that the failure to ensure due process and guarantees to protect civilians leads to enforced disappearances, torture and ill treatment, including sexual violence. Slovenia calls for effective, prompt, thorough and impartial investigation of all violations. Violations must be recognized and addressed, while access to justice, fair trial rights and accountability should be prioritized to ensure that victims find effective remedies and perpetrators are held accountable. We believe that the recently adopted Ljubljana, The Hague Convention will contribute to these efforts. Mr. High Commissioner, in your report, you mentioned the role of the International Committee of Red Cross and other impartial humanitarian organizations to carry out the duties incumbent on the protecting powers as outlined in the Geneva Conventions. Could you elaborate on the complementarity of the work of your office with their efforts? I thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant du Costa Rica.
I now give the floor to Costa Rica.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de l'Ordre souverain de Malte.
Now the Sovereign Order of Malta.
Mr. President, the Sovereign Order of Malta commends the OHCHR's recent report on the situation in Ukraine and deplores the ongoing war in Ukraine, where the order continues to ensure an important humanitarian assistance. We join the appeal to all parties to the conflict to treat all persons deprived of their liberty in full compliance with international human rights and humanitarian law, to comply with the obligation under international humanitarian law to guarantee access and supervisory visit to all places where protected persons are detained, and to allow confidential interviews. The parties should also ensure that all allegations of conflict-related arbitrary detention and forced disappearances, torture and ill treatment are effectively investigated. The international community should, in that sense, take all possible measures to prevent and bring to an end violations of international humanitarian law. As to the human rights situation in Crimea, the Order of Malta welcomes the Secretary General's appeal to the Russian Federation to uphold its obligations under international human rights and humanitarian law. In particular, no individual should be subjected to enforced disappearance. Persons must be able to exercise their right to freedom of movement, to freedom of expression and opinion. It is also of utmost importance that religious groups and individuals benefit from a guarantee to freely practice their religion or belief. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole à la distinguée représentante de l'Espagne.
Spain now has the floor.
Presidente, España se alinea con la declaración de la UE y la del Grupo de Amigos de rendición de cuentas en Ucrania. Agradecemos al Alto Comisionado su presentación, así como el informe provisional del Secretario General. Ambos reúnen pruebas evidentes de que nos encontramos ante la peor crisis humanitaria de Europa desde la Segunda Guerra Mundial, con vulneraciones flagrantes, continuas y generalizadas del derecho internacional humanitario y de los derechos humanos por parte de Rusia, incluyendo ataques indiscriminados contra civiles e infraestructuras civiles. Condenamos rotundamente el uso generalizado y sistemático de ejecuciones sumarias, tortura, tratos inhumanos o degradantes, desapariciones forzadas, detenciones ilegales y arbitrarias, muchas veces en condiciones inhumanas, violencia sexual y de género y traslado y deportación forzados, incluso de menores. Todo ello podría ser constitutivo de crímenes de guerra y de lesa humanidad, cuyos responsables deberán rendir cuentas ante la justicia. Al tiempo que reiteramos nuestra solidaridad y apoyo al pueblo de Ucrania, exigimos que Rusia ponga fin a esta guerra de agresión y respete las normas del derecho internacional humanitario y de los derechos humanos. Además, pedimos la retirada inmediata, completa e incondicional de las tropas rusas de la totalidad del territorio ucraniano dentro de sus fronteras internacionalmente reconocidas, incluida Crimea. Muchas gracias.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant du Luxembourg.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Vice-président, le Luxembourg s'associe à la déclaration de l'Union européenne et remercie le Haut-Commissaire ainsi que la mission d'observation pour son rapport. Alors que nous venons de passer les 500 jours depuis l'invasion injustifiée et illégale par la Russie de l'Ukraine, l'horreur devenue quotidienne en Ukraine nous montre que pour les forces russes, aucune tactique, aucune violation des droits humains, aucun subterfuge n'est exclu pour faire durer l'agression contre l'Ukraine. Les attaques et bombardements de l'armée russe contre la population et les infrastructures civiles ou encore la déportation forcée d'enfants ukrainiens en témoignent. En Crimée, temporairement occupée, le calvaire imposé à la population civile dure désormais depuis plus de 9 ans. Et le rapport du Haut-Commissaire documente pour la période indiquée de nombreux nouveaux cas de torture, de détentions arbitraires, de disparitions forcées, de violences sexuelles et d'autres traitements cruels et inhumains. Ma délégation se joint au Haut-Commissaire en appelant la Russie à respecter incessamment les obligations qui lui incombent au titre du droit international et des droits humains, notamment de la Charte des Nations Unies. Nous appelons la Russie à se retirer sans délai de tous les territoires internationalement reconnus de l'Ukraine. Le Luxembourg salue enfin le travail continu et inlassable de la mission de surveillance des droits de l'homme en Ukraine depuis 9 ans. Si la Russie était sincère dans ses affirmations, elle aurait coopéré pleinement avec ce mécanisme depuis 2014. Monsieur le Haut-Commissaire, que pouvons-nous faire de plus pour soutenir les défenseuses et défenseurs des droits humains en Crimée? Je vous remercie.
Merci. Et je passe la parole à la distinguée représentante des États-Unis.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thank you, High Commissioner, for your excellent reporting on the dire human rights situation brought on the people of Ukraine by Russia's war. It bears repeating that Russia alone is responsible for this war of choice, and Russia alone can end it today. Objective reporting is critical to achieving accountability for the crimes against humanity committed against Ukraine's civilians, including torture, rape, murder, and the deportation of children. These abuses are not random or spontaneous. They are part of the Kremlin's widespread and systematic attack against Ukraine's civilian population. We must not forget that Russia's illegal war against Ukraine began in 2014 in Crimea and the Donbas. There, the Kremlin has worked to dismantle a once vibrant civil society through mass arrests, detentions, and disappearances. The United States stands with all those unjustly detained by Russia and its proxies across Ukraine, including the more than 150 political prisoners in Crimea. We are in awe of the continued bravery of Ukraine's civil society and human rights defenders, as well as the resilience of the people of Ukraine. High Commissioner, your meticulous report on civilian detentions is a credit to the extraordinary members of the Human Rights Monitoring Mission who continue to be denied access to Russia-controlled territory. What additional steps can we take to promote accountability for Russia's unjust arrests and detentions of civilians in Ukraine? I thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de la Belgique.
Monsieur le Vice-président, la Belgique remercie le Haut-Commissaire de son rapport oral et s'associe à la déclaration de l'Union européenne. Le bilan humain continue de s'alourdir de manière insupportable chaque jour qui passe dans cette guerre et les preuves de graves violations des droits humains et du droit humanitaire international ne cessent de s'accumuler. Après plus de 500 jours de guerre d'agression totale, illégale et non provoquée de la Russie contre l'Ukraine, plus de 6 millions d'Ukrainiens sont devenus des réfugiés et plus de 25 000 victimes civiles ont été enregistrées, dont plus de 9 000 morts et 16 000 blessés. Nous sommes alarmés par la situation désastreuse des droits humains dans les territoires temporairement sous le contrôle militaire illégal de la Russie, et en particulier par les disparitions forcées et la détention arbitraire de civils, y compris d'enfants et de personnes âgées. Tous les civils détenus arbitrairement et enlevés doivent être libérés immédiatement et sans condition. Il ne peut y avoir d'impunité pour les crimes de guerre ou les crimes contre l'humanité. La Belgique soutient tous les efforts visant à garantir l'obligation de rendre des comptes et à faire en sorte que les responsables de violations du droit international répondent de leurs actes. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Je passe la parole à la distinguée représentante du Canada.
Merci, Monsieur le Vice-président. Le Canada remercie le Haut-Commissaire et le Secrétaire général pour les rapports. L'intensification de la violence à l'encontre des civils demeure très préoccupante. Comme nous savons, les attaques de missiles russes ont pratiquement triplé en mai. Le Haut-Commissariat estime à presque 25 000 les pertes civiles et l'UNESCO a recensé 260 sites culturels endommagés. Les chiffres réels sont probablement bien supérieurs et nous déplorons l'attaque la plus importante contre les infrastructures civiles à ce jour, la destruction du barrage de Kakhovka. Nous restons également préoccupés par les transferts forcés illégaux, y compris d'enfants, vers des zones sous contrôle russe et par les déportations vers la Russie. Les détentions illégales et les disparitions de civils sont également en augmentation. Nous appelons les parties à respecter le droit international et à libérer les personnes détenues arbitrairement, y compris en Crimée. Nous déplorons le fait que plus de 91% des civils détenus par la Russie ont déclaré avoir été soumis à la torture et à de mauvais traitements, y compris des violences sexuelles. Entre-temps, la Russie refuse à l'ONU l'accès libre et complet aux zones qu'elle occupe. Monsieur le Haut-Commissaire, l'impossibilité d'accéder aux zones occupées par la Russie est inacceptable. Quand pensez-vous que votre bureau puisse accéder à tous les territoires en Ukraine? Merci.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de Malte.
Thank you, Vice President. Malta aligns itself with the statement of the European Union and thanks the High Commissioner for his report. Malta remains seriously concerned about the continued Russian aggression against Ukraine, and particularly about the voluminous human rights violations perpetrated by Russia and its forces on the territory of Ukraine. Today's oral report and the UNSG's report on Crimea highlight the impact of Russia's actions on the population of the occupied regions of Ukraine. We also thank the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine for its excellent work in very difficult circumstances. All these reports converge on a string of serious violations, including enforced disappearances and forced detention, including of children. In Crimea, Ukrainian nationals and other ethnic groups continue to face direct discrimination as a result of decrees by the Russian government, including risks of confiscation of private property, among other violations identified in the UNSG's report. We reiterate our call on Russia to immediately and without preconditions halt this senseless aggression against Ukraine, withdraw all its military and occupying forces from all regions within Ukraine's internationally recognized borders, and to comply with its international obligations under the United Nations Charter. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole à la distinguée représentante du Royaume-Uni.
Thank you. Last week marked 500 days since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. 500 days, not of friendship for the Charter, but its daily flouting. 500 days of atrocities. More than 500 children killed. Thousands of civilians killed. Millions displaced. Schools, hospitals and homes destroyed. Ukraine's fertile fields flooded and mined, not producing food for the world. Tens of thousands of civilians detained, countless among them tortured. Children stolen from their families, their Ukrainian identity denied. No wonder that the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant against President Putin. Thank you, High Commissioner, for the role you and your teams on the ground have played in calling out these systematic violations of human rights law and international humanitarian law. International law matters. The Charter matters. Accountability matters. High Commissioner, how can the international community support those thousands of civilians arbitrarily detained in Russia by Russia? Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de la Nouvelle-Zélande.
I now give the floor to New Zealand.
Vice President, High Commissioner, New Zealand continues to unequivocally condemn Russia's illegal and unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine. We are immensely appalled and saddened by the recorded 25,170 civilian casualties since 24 February 2022. The high rates of reported torture and ill treatment of detainees, including sexual violence, are reprehensible. These latest reports further highlight the egregious human rights violations and abuses and violations of international humanitarian law that have been committed over this period. In Crimea, it is now 9 years since Russia's invasion. The SG's report outlines a comprehensive list of systematic human rights violations with victims disproportionately belonging to the indigenous Crimean Tatar population. We support the call for all states to support human rights defenders in Crimea and for unimpeded access by human rights monitoring mechanisms. New Zealand continues to support efforts to ensure accountability for human rights violations and abuses committed in Ukraine and strongly supports the work of OHCHR in this regard. We again call on the Russian Federation to cease its war of aggression in Ukraine, withdraw its troops from within Ukraine's internationally recognised borders, and return to diplomatic negotiations as a means to resolve this conflict. I thank you.
Merci et je passe la parole à la distinguée représentante de l'Irlande.
Ireland has the floor.
Thank you. Ireland aligns with the statement of the EU and thanks the High Commissioner for his update. We reiterate Ireland's condemnation of Russia's illegal and unjustified full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The report of the Secretary-General presents a harrowing picture of the ongoing abuses facing people in Crimea and the other territories of Ukraine illegally occupied by the Russian Federation. We are deeply concerned at reported violations of the rights to life, liberty and security, as well as the use of torture and ill treatment by Russian security forces. We are further alarmed by reports of forcible transfers of people carried out by Russian security forces and of enforced disappearances continuing as a major human rights violation in this reporting period. We urge Russia to fulfil its obligations under international law and to ensure unimpeded access to OHCHR to territories temporarily under their control. We once again call on Russia to end this war and to withdraw its forces from within the internationally recognised borders of Ukraine. High Commissioner, you note in your report that the true incidence of forced disappearances and population transfers is likely much higher than reported. How can the international community support your office in overcoming difficulties in ascertaining figures, such as the lack of access and security risks for survivors and witnesses? Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de la République populaire démocratique de Corée.
Thank you. DPRK continues to oppose and reject any practice and attempt to manipulate the Human Rights Council in geopolitical interest, targeting of sovereign state, or for political interference in internal affairs under the pretext of human rights. The debate is obviously selective and politically motivated approach by the West aimed at using human rights mechanism as a propaganda campaign forum against the Russian Federation. The root cause of current situation in Ukraine stems from the hegemonic policies of the United States and West, clinging to the military threats through eastward expansion of NATO, while ignoring legitimate demands of Russian Federation to offer security guarantee. It is the legitimate right of Russia to put an end to violation of the human rights of Russians and the slaughter targeting them committed by the Ukraine under the instigation of the West. The anti-Russia human rights rackets pursued by the West to demonize and isolate this country in the international arena have nothing to do with the genuine promotion and protection of human rights. International community should distinguish essential of the anti-Russia human rights racket unveiled by the situation in Ukraine and should not tolerate politicization and instrumentalization of human rights for despicable purpose of certain countries. In conclusion, my delegation aligned itself with a statement made by Venezuela on behalf of the group countries to defend the UN Charter. I thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de Turquie.
Thank you. Turkey has the floor.
Mr. Vice President, we thank the High Commissioner for his oral update. The findings should be a matter of concern for the entire international community. Allegations about human rights violations should be investigated and the facts should be clearly established. Our support to Ukraine for its territorial integrity goes back to 2014 when Crimea was illegally annexed. Turkey is home to more than 3 million citizens of Crimean Tatar descent, and the Crimea and the well-being of Tatar Turks is a key issue for us. Protection of safety, rights and well-being of Tatar Turks living in the peninsula is also our priority. We continue to stand in full solidarity with the Tatar Turks in supporting their efforts to exercise their rights. We will also maintain our efforts on the release of the Tatar Turks detained for political purposes. We continue to actively participate in the International Crimea Platform. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole à la distinguée représentante de la Macédoine du Nord.
I now give the floor to North Macedonia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We thank the High Commissioner for the update on the human rights situation in Ukraine. North Macedonia fully supports the work of the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, the Commission of Inquiry, and the experts under the Moscow mechanism of the OSCE. The reports about the human rights situation in Ukraine are full of testimonies about arbitrary detention, enforced disappearances, torture and ill treatment, sexual violence, rape, use of unofficial places of detention, forcibly transfers and deportations, use of civilians as shields, mass arrests and collective detention, and use of the so-called practice of the filtration. All violations and abuses of human rights and international humanitarian law must be investigated and perpetrators brought to justice. We call for an end to the restrictions on the right to be free from torture and cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, right to life, right to peaceful assembly, right to freedom of opinion and expression without fear of reprisal, right to property, freedom of movement, association, thought, conscience and religion. I thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de la République bolivarienne du Venezuela.
Gracias, presidente. El tema 10 de la Agenda del Consejo de Derechos Humanos fue concebido para abordar la asistencia técnica y el fomento de la capacidad para mejorar la situación de los derechos humanos en los países concernidos, siempre con su concurso y mediante el diálogo genuino y la cooperación, pilares fundamentales de las labores de este Consejo. Lamentamos que bajo el tema 10 se promuevan iniciativas alejadas de estos claros parámetros, abonando el camino de la politización de nuestras labores que hicieron sucumbir a la extinta Comisión de Derechos Humanos. Reiteramos que las iniciativas fundadas en motivaciones asignadas por la politización, la selectividad y los dobles estándares en nada contribuyen a la promoción y protección de los derechos humanos en el mundo y no prestan ningún beneficio en favor de las personas ni de los grupos vulnerables. Reafirmamos la necesidad de defender los derechos humanos universales, indivisibles, interdependientes e interrelacionados de manera constructiva y con base en el diálogo genuino y la cooperación, por lo que condenamos la utilización de estos espacios tan cuidados de este Consejo como el tema 10 de la agenda, con fines muy diferentes para los cuales fueron concebidos. Las cuestiones de derechos humanos deben ser abordadas con transparencia, objetividad e imparcialidad y con apego a los propósitos y principios consagrados en la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Muchas gracias.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de l'Autriche.
Mr. Vice President, Austria aligns itself with the EU statement and thanks the High Commissioner for the update on the human rights situation in Ukraine. Austria is deeply concerned by Russia's continued violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law in Ukraine and condemns in the strongest possible terms the latest escalation by Russia of its illegal, unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression. The OHCHR's latest report states that more than 91% of civilian detainees held by Russia have suffered torture and ill treatment, including sexual violence. We call on Russia to ensure that the conditions of detention fulfill all applicable international legal requirements and to grant independent human rights monitors and humanitarian organizations access to all detainees under its control. We also call on Russia to use security detention of civilians only as an exceptional measure and in strict compliance with international legal standards, including the 4th Geneva Convention. Austria reiterates the importance of independently investigating all allegations of arbitrary detention, enforced disappearance, torture and ill treatment, sexual violence, regardless of the affiliation of the alleged perpetrators. Those responsible, including persons in position of command, must be prosecuted. Mr. High Commissioner, we fully support OHCHR's work in Ukraine and its important role in documenting violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. How can we best assist OHCHR's efforts on the ground? I thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de la Grèce.
Vice Chair, High Commissioner, Greece aligns itself with the EU statement. We thank the High Commissioner for his update and the monitoring mission for its latest reports. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has created a humanitarian catastrophe of massive proportions. Killing of thousands of civilians, millions of displaced people and refugees, Ukrainian civilians and critical civilian infrastructure are continuously targeted by indiscriminate attacks. Greece condemns in the strongest possible terms Russia's unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine, which grossly violates international law and the UN Charter and undermines international security and stability. We are particularly worried about reports of filtration process conducted by Russian armed forces and affiliated armed groups against civilians in the Russian-occupied areas in Ukraine, with the most comprehensive system being in Donetsk region, especially Mariupol. We fully support the various processes towards ensuring accountability for international human rights and humanitarian law violations and abuses perpetrated in the course of this conflict. The investigation of the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and the work of the HRC Independent Commission of Inquiry are applauded and welcome. The deplorable invasion of Ukraine is a stark reminder that revisionism remains an ever-present threat. A clear line has been drawn between those that shun international law, seeking to forcefully impose their revisionist agenda on their neighbors, and those that are committed to defend a rules-based international order. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de la Slovaquie.
Thank you, Vice President. Slovakia fully aligns itself with the previous statements of group of states which it belongs to. We thank you, High Commissioner, for your update. We are also grateful to the monitoring mission in Ukraine for further reports on human rights situation in Ukraine. We consider of utmost importance that the international community is regularly updated of the situation in Ukraine through reports of the HRMMU as well as your oral updates. In this respect, Slovakia fully supports the draft resolution on cooperation with and assistance to Ukraine to be adopted later this week. Information provided to us confirm yet again the devastating consequences of the Russian unprovoked and unjustified military aggression against Ukraine. We see, among other unacceptable actions by Russia, when healthcare establishments as well as educational facilities continue to be targets of Russian attacks. We strongly condemn attacks against civilian and civilians' infrastructures. Previous month, we were appalled by the destruction of Nova Kakhovka Dam, as well as by reports that Russian forces were shelling Ukrainian rescuers trying to reach flooded areas in the Kherson region. Mr. High Commissioner, rest assured that my country will continue to support the work of your office in and for Ukraine in its fight for freedom and full respect of human rights and fundamental freedoms. In this connection, we once again call on the Russian Federation to allow access to independent human rights monitors, including OHCHR, to the whole territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
Merci, et je passe la parole au distingué représentant de Chine.
谢谢副主席先生。
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
中方关于乌克兰问题的立场是一贯的，即各国主权和领土完整都应该得到尊重，联合国宪章宗旨和原则都应该得到遵守，各国合理安全关切都应该得到重视，一切有利于和平解决危机的努力都应该得到支持。当前形势下， 世界更需要的是停火止战，而不是武器投放；是对话谈判，而不是战事升级；是劝和促谈，而不是阵营对抗。最近一段时间，提出和平倡议的国家越来越多，劝和促谈的声音越来越强。我们期待有关方面积极回应国际社会的理性呼声。中方坚决反对将人权问题政治化，反对借人权问题对别国施压。中方将继续落实习近平主席提出 出的4个共同和3点思考，加强与各方对话交流，不断凝聚共识，积累互信，为推动乌克兰危机政治解决做出中国贡献。谢谢副主席先生。
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de la Suisse.
Monsieur le vice-président, la Suisse remercie le haut-commissaire et le secrétaire général pour leur travail sur l'Ukraine et pour le rapport intérimaire sur la situation en Crimée. Ce rapport indique que les violations des droits de l'homme se sont intensifiées au cours de l'année et demie qui a suivi l'agression militaire de la Russie contre l'Ukraine. Nous réitérons notre appel à la cessation immédiate des hostilités par la Russie et à un retrait complet du territoire ukrainien. Nous rappelons à la Russie qu'elle doit respecter ses obligations en vertu du droit international humanitaire et des droits de l'homme en tant que puissance occupante. Les violations de ces droits, y compris les restrictions aux droits civils et politiques à l'égard des minorités ethniques en Crimée, doivent cesser. Nous soutenons pleinement les recommandations du secrétaire général aux autorités russes de respecter l'interdiction absolue de la torture et de permettre une enquête indépendante, impartiale et efficace sur toutes les allégations de mauvais traitements, de torture, de violences sexuelles, d'arrestations et de détention arbitraire dans les territoires sous son contrôle. En outre, les violations graves du droit international humanitaire doivent faire l'objet d'enquêtes et les responsables doivent être traduits en justice. La Suisse soutient également l'appel demandant un accès sans entrave à la Crimée pour le Haut-Commissariat. Monsieur le Haut-Commissaire, comment la communauté internationale peut-elle soutenir la mise en œuvre des recommandations du HCDH vis-à-vis de la Russie? Je vous remercie.
Merci et je passe la parole à la distinguée représentante de la République de Moldavie.
Thank you. This week we're confronted with a somber milestone, marking 500 days of unrelenting and ruthless war. Countless war crimes, millions displaced from their homes, and a staggering toll of over 25,000 civilian casualties, alongside widespread torture, sexual violence, and ill treatment. These figures, however distressing, merely scratch the surface of the immense human suffering endured. Meanwhile, Russia brutally continues to attack civilian infrastructure, residential buildings, commercial premises, spanning from west to east, from Lviv to Kramatorsk, where recently a restaurant was attacked in broad daylight, killing 12 innocent people. Each life lost, each act of brutality serves as a stark reminder of the urgent need for decisive action and unwavering support for Ukraine. Republic of Moldova reiterates its strong condemnation of the destruction of the Novakhovka Dam by the Russian Federation. We deplore the far-reaching implications for the well-being and safety of individuals with water and food security concerns aggravated by the release of hazardous chemicals into the water, potential health crisis and outbreak of waterborne diseases such as cholera during the current record-high temperatures, but also an alarming impact over the environment. We underscore the imperative need to ensure accountability for the serious crimes committed on Ukrainian territory. Ensuring accountability is crucial for promoting justice, deterring future violations, and providing redress to the victims. We reiterate our full support for the Commission of Inquiry, the International Criminal Court, and its independent investigations of war crimes, alongside the dedicated efforts of the core group towards a tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole à la distinguée représentante de l'Albanie.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We thank the High Commissioner for the in-depth update on the development in Ukraine and for his efforts to document the reality of the human rights situation on the ground. As clearly documented in the report of the Secretary General, the human rights situation in Ukraine has further deteriorated as a result of the unjustified full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia and the subsequent occupation of additional parts of the Ukrainian territory. The alarming findings of the numerous violations of human rights, including torture, ill treatment, enforced disappearances, and arbitrary detention of civilians, including men, women, children, and elderly persons, highlight once more the need to ensure accountability for the serious crimes committed and ensure justice for all the victims. We echo the call to support human rights defenders who work for the protection of human rights in Crimea and to facilitate unimpeded access to Crimea by international and regional human rights monitoring mechanisms. Albania stands in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. We reiterate our firm position not to recognize any territories acquired by force in their attempted annexation and express our unwavering support for the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine, within its internationally recognized borders. I thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de la Géorgie.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Georgia thanks the High Commissioner for the presentation and the interim report. We remain deeply concerned over the consequences of Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine, which has entailed devastating humanitarian consequences, claimed tens of thousands of lives, and led to the forced displacement. We condemn the indiscriminate strikes against civilians and civilian infrastructure, including the recent attacks in Kramatorsk and Lviv, which have left dozens of peaceful residents, including children, killed and injured. The findings of the report speak about the human rights violations committed by the Russian authorities against locals in the temporarily occupied Autonomous Republic of Crimea, especially against Ukrainians and indigenous Crimean Tatars, including local human rights defenders who live under constant threat of arbitrary detentions and enforced disappearance, as well as torture and ill treatment. We emphasize the need of immediate, safe and unfettered access of the OHCHR and other international humanitarian organizations to the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, as well as other areas of Ukraine temporarily controlled by Russia. We reiterate our call on Russia to comply with the provisional measures of the ICJ of 16 March 2022, immediately cease the aggression, completely and unconditionally withdraw all its troops and military equipment from the whole territory of Ukraine, and respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, as well as all its neighbors within the internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole à la distinguée représentante de Roumanie.
Mr. Vice President, Romania thanks the High Commissioner for his oral update on the human rights situation in Ukraine and the interim report on the situation of human rights in Crimea. We remain deeply concerned about the violations of human rights committed in Ukraine and in the illegally annexed Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol by Russian armed forces and paramilitary entities controlled by them. Following Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, human rights violations such as arbitrary arrest and detention, harassment and disbarment on arbitrary grounds against Crimean human rights defenders, curtailment of the civic space and of freedom of expression and opinion, of religion or belief intensified or re-emerged in Crimea, as noted in the interim report of the Secretary General. Enforced disappearances was a major human rights violation perpetrated in 2022. Romania strongly condemns Russia's actions targeting civilians, especially Ukrainian children, including their forcible transfer to parts of Ukraine's territory temporarily occupied by Russia, and or their unlawfully deportation to Russia, as well as attempts to re-educate them, as shown in the recent Moscow Mechanism report. We call on Russia to respect and ensure full respect for international humanitarian law and human rights law. Romania remains a strong supporter of the investigation of all grave crimes committed in and against Ukraine, including attacks on schools and hospitals and other civilian infrastructure, and will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it needs. Mr. High Commissioner, what could the international community do in order to support the victims of sexual and gender-based violence committed by the Russian armed forces?
Merci.
Thank you.
Et je passe la parole à la distinguée représentante du Monténégro.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. High Commissioner Türk, we gratefully note the continuing engagement of your office in providing technical assistance to the government of Ukraine in its effort to strengthen the protection and promotion of human rights within its jurisdiction. Regular and focused reporting based on credible findings of the monitoring missions remain also instrumental for advancing accountability for human rights violations. As the report substantiates, Russia's ongoing brutal, unjustified and illegal war of aggression against Ukraine in continuing breach of the UN Charter and international law has led to a wide range of grave human rights violations that may constitute crimes against humanity. The report documented that the vast majority of the arbitrarily detained civilians, including children and elderly, were perpetrated by Russia. Many of them also resulted in enforced disappearances. The documented widespread practices of torture and ill treatment, including sexual and gender-based violence, summary executions, and the use of children as human shields, manifestly mirror the brutal face of Russian aggression. In Crimea, the human rights situation has drastically deteriorated since its illegal temporary occupation. Human rights defenders, journalists, civil society activists, and citizens are subjected to arbitrary arrest, politically and religiously motivated persecution, enforced disappearances, arbitrary seizure of property, and forced conscription. The High Commissioner, as the report has found and recommended, comprehensive accountability of violation of international humanitarian law and international humanitarian rights.
Merci beaucoup pour votre intervention. Je passe la parole au distingué représentant de la Pologne.
Merci, Monsieur le Vice-Président. Mr. High Commissioner, Poland aligns itself with the EU statement. We thank for this report on human rights in Crimea and for your update on the situation in Ukraine. Poland strongly condemns Russia's unprovoked aggression against Ukraine and its ongoing violations of international human rights law and humanitarian law. The atrocities, including violations that might amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity, have had a devastating impact on civilians. Those who incite and commit atrocity crimes in Ukraine must be held accountable, and justice must be brought to victims and their families. Poland is alarmed by the human rights situation in Crimea and is gravely concerned by the reports on the use of torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment against Crimean residents by Russian law enforcement authorities. We strongly condemn the conscription of Ukrainian nationals residing in Crimea into Russia's armed forces and any pressure or propaganda aimed at securing their voluntary enlistment. Poland does not recognize Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea and will call on Russia to cease its occupation of Crimea. Poland continues to stand with Ukraine and remains committed to supporting its people. Mr. High Commissioner, how can we better support human rights defenders who work for the protection of human rights in Crimea and Ukraine? I thank you.
Merci. C'était le dernier orateur que nous pouvions accueillir pour cette réunion. Excellents et distingués collègues, ceci nous amène à la fin de cette réunion. Nous reprendrons nos travaux à 15 heures pour poursuivre la présentation orale du Haut-Commissaire des conclusions du rapport périodique du Haut-Commissariat sur les droits de l'homme sur la situation des droits de l'homme en Ukraine et du rapport intérimaire du secrétaire général sur la situation des droits de l'homme dans la République autonome de Crimée temporairement occupée et dans la ville de Sébastopol en Ukraine. Nous entendrons également la présentation de la mise à jour orale du Haut-Commissaire sur la Géorgie. Nous nous prononcerons ensuite sur les projets de proposition et je clôture par la présente la 33e réunion de la 53e session du Conseil des droits de l'homme.
I know that I'm playing the fool. I'm the one that let it, forget it, 'cause you're the one who's cruel. Just ring me up to put test. Come and let me have it, I'm expecting nothing less. I said I'm right there when you need me right there. And we can make it, I can feel it, I swear. You want it your way, well I want it mine. You don't reply, but I see you online. Listen to my message on your phone. I tell you everything after the tone. There's something I was always meant to say. It's written in bold on your display. Pick up the phone. Pick up the phone. Look at me now. You don't see who I am. Look at me now. Don't you know that I've changed? Come on, I know that I was wrong, but you leave me hanging here all night long. Come on, I know now where I belong. Just hear me out after the tone. Listen to my message on your phone. I tell you everything after the tone. There's something I was always meant to say. It's written in bold on your display. Pick up the phone. Pick up the phone. Pick up the phone.
No poetry, no fire, no telling you're tired, no letter, no gold, no growing old. It's not a bad world, brother. It's not a bad world. Crying your eyes out. It's all about crying your eyes out. Cry on me now. Cry on me now. No shepherd, no shame, no pictures to frame, no fix, no glory, no telling your story. It's not a bad world, brother.
Real Swiss pop. Music. Pure. Swiss made by SRG SSR.
It was in May 95 when we met for the very first time. We were only little boys. I could not imagine that you would be my best friend. 20 years later on, now I'm looking in the mirror. We are two grown-ups now. You're like a brother to me, so won't you never let me down? Oh, run to me whenever you are lonely. Run to me whenever you are blue. Run to me whenever things aren't easy. Run to me and see me run to you. And through all of the hard times, I could always count on you. You'd pick me up when I was down. Rebels without a cause, but now we walk the line. 20 years later on, now I see lines on my face, but you are still by my side. You're like no other to me, and so I'll never let you down. Oh, run to me whenever you are lonely. Run to me whenever you are blue. Run to me whenever things aren't easy. Run to me and see me run to you. It won't be different in 20 years. We will be the same roads, and we will be drinking and talking on women and football, and the song remains the same. We'll be the same. Run to me whenever you are lonely. Run to me whenever you are blue. Run to me whenever things aren't easy. Run to me and see me run to you.
In the town where I was born lived a man who sailed to sea, and he told us of his life in the land of submarines. yellow submarine. We all live in a yellow submarine. Yellow submarine. Yellow submarine. Live a life of ease. Every one of us has all we need. Sky of blue and sea of green in our yellow submarine. We all live in a yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. We all live in a yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. We all live in a yellow submarine. Yellow submarine. Yellow submarine. We all live in a yellow submarine.
Tastes like strawberries on a summer evening, and it sounds just like a song. I want more berries and that summer feeling. It's so wonderful and warm. Breathe me in, breathe me out. I don't know if I could ever go without. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know if I could ever go without watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar. Strawberries on a summer evening. Baby, you're the end of June. I want your belly and that summer feeling, getting washed away in you. Breathe me in, breathe me out. I don't know if I could ever go without watermelon sugar high, 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 watermelon sugar high. I just wanna taste it. I just wanna taste it. Watermelon sugar high. Tastes like strawberries on a summer evening, and it sounds just like a song. I want your belly and that summer feeling. I don't know if I could ever go without watermelon sugar high, 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 watermelon sugar high. I just wanna taste it. I just wanna taste it. love with you, still don't know why. We're total opposites, but you drive me wild. I try to stop, I try to hold back from this obsession for you, but I can turn it off. Oh, it's running in my veins, constantly on my brain. The thought of you just never goes away. Oh, I want you every day, I want you every way. I'm addicted, and I know that you won't let go. Yeah, I've seen the fear in your eyes. You think I'm way too crazy for you, but it's your voice that's making me so. When you're talking to me so low, oh, 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 oh. When you're talking to me so low. I wanna do this right, don't go too fast. For once in my life, make something last. More than the one night stands, they disappear. Just like names and faces, but I keep holding on to you. It's running in my veins, constantly on my brain. The thought of you just never goes away. Oh, I want you every day, I want you every way. I'm addicted, and I know that you won't let go. Yeah, I've seen the fear in your eyes. You think I'm way too crazy for you, but it's your voice that's making me so. When you're talking to me so low, oh, 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 oh. When you're talking to me so low, oh, 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 oh. When you're talking to me so low, well, you wanna let go. Yeah, I've seen the fear in your eyes. You think I'm way too crazy for you, but it's your voice that's making me so, so, so low. You won't let go. Yeah, I've seen the fear in your eyes. You think I'm way too crazy for you, but it's your voice that's making me so. When you're talking to me so low, oh, 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 making me so. When you're talking to me so low, oh, 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 when you're talking to me so low, oh, 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 when you're talking to me so low.
Riderai, una foto senza data, una fitta allontanata, e vedrai che riderai. Riderai di quei tagli di capelli, le letture delle stelle che non ci hanno preso mai. Come stai? Certe volte gli occhi stanchi han bisogno di pulirsi o forse solo di guardare meglio. Riderai. Come fai a restare ancora in piedi? Cosa fai nel mio domani? Al mio domani cosa fai? Come stai? Quante volte te l'ho chiesto, quante volte mi hai risposto con un altro come stai? Riderai fino a piangere di gusto e non sarà mai troppo presto quando in faccia a quello specchio riderai. Riderai. Ti vedrai dare fuoco alle vergogne, Radio Swiss Pop.
Tried so hard to run away, try to fight the love nature, but you're the end of every way. You're my past, you're my future, you're my gravity. All I want is you, you're my gravity. You pull me back into your gravity. There's no getaway from your gravity. Forever I stay. Tried to stop following my heart, try to walk in your direction, but I cannot be apart, no. So strong is your attraction, girl. You're my gravity. All I want is you. You're my gravity. You pull me back into your gravity. There's no getaway from your gravity. Forever I stay in your gravity. Your gravity. I know that I can never run away. I know that I can never hide. Wherever I go, you'll be there to pull me back to your side. You're my gravity. All I want is you. You're my gravity. You pull me back into your gravity. There's no getaway from your gravity. Forever I stay in your gravity. Your gravity.
Traveling in a freighter combi on a hippie trailhead full of zombies. I met a strange lady, she made me nervous. She took me in and gave me breakfast. And she said, do you come from a land down under? Where women go and men wonder. Can't you hear the thunder? You better run, you better take cover. Buying bread from a man in Brussels. He was 6 foot understand my ups and downs. There you were, with sweet love and devotion, deeply touching my emotion. I want to stop and thank you, baby. I want to stop and thank you, baby. Yes, I do. How sweet it is to be loved by you. Feels so fine. How sweet it is to be loved by you. I close my eyes at night, wondering where would I be without you in my life. Everything I did was just a bore. Everywhere I went, it seems I've been there before. But you're bright enough for me all of my days. With a love so sweet in so many ways. I wanna stop, thank you, baby. I just wanna stop, thank you, baby. Oh yes, how sweet it is to be loved by you. It's just like sugar sometimes. How sweet it is to be loved by you. Whoa, yeah. You were better to me than I was to myself. For me, there's you, and there ain't nobody else. I wanna stop and thank you, baby. I just wanna stop and thank you, baby. Oh yes, how sweet it is to be loved by you. How sweet it is to be loved by you. Oh now, how sweet it is to be loved by you. It's like jelly, baby. Oh yeah, how sweet it is to be loved by you. Just like honey to the bee, baby. Yeah, now, how sweet it is to be loved by you. How sweet it is to be loved by you.
Listen, I am on my way, no matter what they say. And when the chips are down, move strong, you can't go wrong. You try to be a star, don't you know that's already what you are? Yeah, I don't care, I don't really care. I don't care, don't you know I always try to be the best I can. I don't care, I don't really care. No, no, I don't care, don't you know I always give my best. Whether you win or lose, it's not up to you to choose. So don't be scared, you will succeed, cause you are well prepared. People like to criticize, of course you will polarize. It won't break your back, it's always easy to walk on a beaten track, yeah.